Imagine for a second just a single silent drop of water leaking from a loose fitting behind your dishwasher.
Right, the kind of thing you'd never even notice.
Exactly. You can't see it, you can't hear it. But over the next 48 hours, that tiny localized moisture is going to orchestrate this massive biological and structural chain reaction,
Oh yeah, it literally starts consuming the wooden skeleton of your house.
which really makes you wonder, have you ever stopped to think how quickly water damage can spread through a home in Georgia?
Most people definitely haven't.
Right. And what actually happens when a small leak is ignored for too long? Why do so many homeowners underestimate the urgency of water damage restoration?
Well, it's out of sight, out of mind, usually.
Yeah, but how fast can water really turn into a major structural problem if it's not handled immediately? Could waiting just a few hours or even a day make the difference between a simple cleanup and thousands of dollars in repairs?
It absolutely can. I mean, it does every single day. The reality of water intrusion is just far more aggressive and scientifically complex than most people assume.
We tend to just think of water as a puddle to be wiped up.
Right. Exactly. Completely ignoring the microscopic warfare that's happening underneath.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. Because today on the Deep Dive, our mission is to break down exactly why quick action matters for water damage restoration in Georgia.
And we have some incredible source material today.
We really do. We've gathered a stack of incredibly detailed sources for this. We're talking technical service guidelines, massive data sets from the EPA and the Department of Energy, and procedural manuals from the professionals who handle these crises on the ground.
Yeah, and looking at the data from these agencies, it completely changes your perspective on the environment inside your own walls.
It totally does. But before we dive into all that science, we need to let you know that this deep dive is sponsored by Four Seasons Air Care LLC.
Fantastic company. Oh, absolutely. You can reach them by phone at 404-891-0225. They are the true professionals when it comes to keeping your home's environment safe and functioning perfectly.
And their service list is huge.
Yeah, they offer incredibly comprehensive services. So, air duct cleaning GA, crawl space encapsulation, ductwork installation and repair, dryer vent cleaning, disinfection services, HVAC system cleaning, and of course, expert water damage restoration.
Which is deeply relevant to what we're exploring today, because when you synthesize the EPA guidelines and the industry protocols, the very first thing that jumps off the page is that water damage isn't just a physical mess.
Right.
It is a rapidly ticking clock. And, when you factor in a unique climate like Georgia's, you are essentially starting that clock with a massive handicap.
So let's talk about that ticking clock, because I think most of us look at a spilled bucket of water or a leaky pipe under the sink and think, okay, I'll grab some towels, maybe run a mop over it, and I'll deep clean it when I have a minute.
Yeah, that's the standard reaction. But the EPA standard paints a terrifyingly fast timeline. How fast are we talking?
Well, the EPA dictates a very strict 24 to 48-hour window. And they aren't just throwing those numbers out arbitrarily.
Right. It's based on science.
Exactly. It's cellular biology. Mold spores are omnipresent. They're floating in the air around you right now.
Which is a creepy thought.
It is. But they are completely harmless until they find two things. Organic food, like the paper backing of your drywall or your wood studs, and moisture.
Oh,
So if water damage materials are not completely scientifically dried within that specific 48-hour time frame, those dormant spores just activate.
and in Georgia, that activation happens even faster, right? Because the air itself is already loaded with moisture.
Absolutely.
The sources point out that Georgia's relative humidity frequently exceeds 70%.
Yeah, and that ambient humidity acts like an accelerant. In an environment where the air is already saturated, water on the ground evaporates much slower.
So it just sits there.
Right. It sits on your floors longer, giving the mold the perfect incubator. Within that 48-hour window in Georgia, mold colonization isn't just a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty.
A mathematical certainty. Wow. That is intense. And it's because water is incredibly sneaky, isn't it? The sources talk about this physical mechanism called the wicking effect.
Yeah, the wicking effect. So we tend to think of water under the influence of gravity, like it spills, it pools on the lowest point of the floor, and it just sits there.
That's what you see, right?
Exactly. But water actually travels against gravity through porous materials via capillary action.
Wait, really? It goes up?
It does. Think of the wood in your baseboards and the paper in your drywall like a tightly packed bundle of microscopic straws. Through surface tension, the water literally pulls itself upward.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it soaks into your hardwood floors, penetrates the subfloor beneath that, and then it physically wicks up into your drywall and the wooden studs inside your wall cavity.
So it's essentially using the structural framing of your house as a giant sponge, just climbing up the walls out of sight in the dark, damp space where you can't even see it happening.
It completely changes the scope of the damage. A puddle that looks like it's contained to, say, a 3-foot area on your kitchen floor might actually be spreading 3 feet up the inside of your walls.
Okay, I have to push back here on behalf of every homeowner listening, because the immediate primal instinct when you see a wet floor is to grab a bunch of those standard household box fans from the garage.
Oh, the classic box fan technique.
Right. You point them directly at the puddle, turn them on high, and just assume the job is done.
It's the most common DIY approach for sure, but the procedural manuals we reviewed are explicitly clear that this does not work.
Not at all.
No, and it can actually make things worse.
Yeah, looking at the physics of it in the sources, using a box fan on a flooded floor is like blowing on a hot bowl of soup to cool down the entire kitchen.
That's a perfect analogy. And not only is it like blowing on soup, but it actually risks spreading the moisture further.
Oh, so?
Well, a standard household fan only moves surface air. It creates a breeze. But a breeze does absolutely nothing to change the vapor pressure inside the structural materials.
Because the water is trapped inside the wood.
Exactly. It gets trapped deep within the dense cellular core of wood or the gypsum inside the drywall. To get that water out, you need to create a severe pressure differential that literally sucks the moisture out of the material.
And a box fan just can't do that.
Not even close. A box fan completely lacks the power to extract moisture from deep within those wall cavities or the dense wood of your subfloors.
So listener, think about your own home right now. If a pipe burst in your hallway, would you just rely on a towel and a fan, completely unknowingly letting that water wick up behind your baseboards?
Just creating a microscopic jungle inside your walls.
Exactly. And if we look deeper at what is actually spreading, we realize you aren't just fighting the environment. What's wicking up those walls isn't just pure, clean H2O.
No, it definitely isn't.
That brings us to the actual composition of the water. And this is where the science gets really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because water isn't just water.
Right. The professional restoration industry relies on a global standard called the IICRC S500.
What it stands for?
The Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. And their S500 standard strictly categorizes water into 3 threat levels based on its contamination.
Okay, let's go through them.
So category 1 is white water. This is a sanitary source, like a fresh supply line to a sink breaking. It's safe, but only temporarily.
Because it degrades the moment it touches anything.
Precisely. The moment that clean water touches the dirt on your floor or the dust inside your walls or sits long enough to grow bacteria, it devolves into category 2.
Which is gray water.
Yes. This water has a significant degree of chemical, biological, or physical contaminants. Think of the discharge from your dishwasher or water from a punctured waterbed.
Gross.
Very. It has enough microorganisms that it can cause physical illness if you or your pets are exposed to it.
And then there's the absolute nightmare scenario.
Category 3, black water.
Just the name is ominous.
It is highly unsanitary and deeply hazardous. We are talking about sewage backups, rising floodwaters from outside rivers or streams, or even Category 2 water that has just been left sitting for too long.
So it upgrades itself to the worst level.
Exactly. Category 3 water is teeming with pathogenic, toxigenic, or other harmful agents. Feces, pesticides, heavy metals.
Oh, man. So depending on the category, that capillary action wicking up your drywall is potentially dragging raw pathogens and heavy metals right into the structural skeleton of your house.
Yep, straight up into the framing.
And what happens to the physical structure itself while all this biology is happening?
The physical toll is catastrophic if left unchecked. Wood doesn't just get wet. As the plant cells in the wood absorb the moisture, they physically swell.
Right.
Hardwood floors start to cup and buckle. Structural beams bulge, distort, and eventually succumb to dry rot, losing all load-bearing capacity.
It just destroys the integrity of the house.
And it's not just wood. Metal components like structural brackets and nails begin to oxidize and rust, weakening the framing.
And the electrical systems. The manuals point out that water wicking up inside the walls and hitting your wiring creates massive fire and shock hazards.
Yes, water acts as a conductor, and wet insulation around wiring can easily lead to electrical shorts.
That is so dangerous.
It is. And if we look at Georgia specifically, there is a very unique geographical threat that multiplies this structural damage.
Oh, right, because Georgia is famous for its dense, clay-rich soil.
The classic red clay. When you have flooded basements or massive water intrusion in crawl spaces, that water doesn't just drain away quickly like it would in sandy soil.
Because the clay just holds on to it.
Exactly. It sits and interacts with the clay soil around and beneath your home's foundation. Clay acts like a dense sponge. It absorbs the water and expands massively.
Okay, I see where this is going.
This swelling creates what is known as hydrostatic pressure. It exerts thousands of pounds of force against your concrete foundation walls, literally bowing or cracking the concrete inward.
So the ground itself shifts and expands under the weight of the water, compromising the entire structural integrity of the home.
It's a massive force.
That is terrifying. But let's say the damage is hidden inside the walls and you don't see the cracked foundation or warped wood yet. You just walk into a room a few days after a leak,
Okay.
and you get hit with that smell.
Oh, you know the one.
Yeah, that heavy, classic mildew smell.
What's fascinating here is that the smell isn't just an unpleasant odor of a quote-unquote wet house. The science behind that scent is actually a biological warning alarm.
The sources refer to these as MVOCs, right?
Yes, microbial volatile organic compounds. Mold is a living organism.
Right.
When it is actively growing, it eats the organic material in your home, like the wood framing, and it digests it. As a byproduct of that digestion, it off-gasses these chemical compounds into the air.
Ew, okay.
So when you smell that musty odor, you aren't just smelling wet wood, you are inhaling the gaseous waste products of an actively feeding mold colony.
That is so gross.
It is scientific proof that the colony is alive, it's eating your house, and it's off-gassing into the air you breathe.
I think we all need to take a deep breath after hearing that, preferably in a completely dry room.
Definitely.
Let's shift gears for a moment, because hearing about Category 3 black water dragging pathogens into your walls, hydrostatic pressure cracking your foundation, and inhaling the off-gassing of active mold colonies.
It's a lot.
It is. And it makes one thing incredibly clear. This is not a DIY situation.
No, it requires a highly specialized scientific intervention.
Which makes this the perfect time to remind you that this deep dive is brought to you by Four Seasons Air Care, LLC.
Because when you are dealing with a ticking 48-hour mold clock and invisible pathogens, you cannot afford to wait.
Exactly. You need professionals who actually understand the physics and biologies of what is happening to your home.
They bring the necessary technical arsenal to address both the biological hazards and the structural compromises simultaneously.
And Four Seasons Air Care LLC holds an incredible 4.9-star rating from over 798 verified reviews.
That's a huge sample size.
It is. And when you read those reviews, they consistently highlight exactly what we are discussing today. Why quick action matters for water damage restoration in Georgia.
Customers constantly praise their incredible 247 rapid response.
Because when water is wicking up your drywall, minutes matter. They are known for arriving on site within 45 minutes of an emergency call, ready to stop that damage in its tracks.
Plus, they back their work with a 100% money-back guarantee.
Which gives you such peace of mind. So do not wait for the damage to multiply. Call the sponsor now, Water Damage Restoration in Georgia. Reach them directly at 404-891-0225.
And the true value of a company like that is their holistic approach. They don't just extract water, they handle the entire environmental ecosystem of the house.
It's so true. Because, like we mentioned, Four Seasons Air Care offers comprehensive air duct cleaning GA, crawl space encapsulation, ductwork installation and repair, dryer vent cleaning, disinfection services, HVAC system cleaning, and elite water damage restoration.
A full suite of services.
Yeah, keep that number handy, 404-891-0225. Okay, so if we transition back to the data,
Let's do it.
we've clearly established the physical destruction and the severe biological hazards, but this logically leads to the next massive concern for any homeowner. How does all of this unseen damage translate to financial reality?
Because nobody ever budgets for an emergency like this.
Exactly. But the data for the Department of Energy and the insurance industry tells a very sobering story about the cost of hesitation.
The numbers are definitive, and they heavily penalize a delayed response. Immediate professional water extraction is 60 to 80% more cost-effective than paying for the delayed structural repairs that result from waiting.
60 to 80%.
Yeah.
That is a massive financial swing.
It is the literal difference between paying to simply dry out a wet subfloor using advanced equipment versus having to completely demolish that floor, rip out the joists, and rebuild a section of your home due to dry rot and structural mold failure.
Right.
Mitigation is always cheaper than reconstruction.
Well, let's talk about insurance, because the immediate reflex is always, oh, it's fine, my homeowner's insurance will cover it.
They often do, but the insurance industry operates on very specific definitions. Most homeowner policies cover what they explicitly define as sudden and accidental damage.
Like a burst pipe.
Exactly. A burst pipe or a suddenly failing water heater fits that definition perfectly.
But there's a catch.
A very significant one. If you let the water sit, maybe hoping it dries out on its own, and secondary damage like mold or rot develops because you didn't act quickly, the insurance adjuster can classify that secondary damage as neglect.
Oh, wow. So they blame you.
Right. They will cover the broken pipe but deny the $30,000 in mold remediation because you failed to mitigate the damage.
That hurts.
And furthermore, when you file a water damage claim, adjusters don't just take your word for it. They require rigorous technical documentation.
The sources mentioned they need something called moisture maps. What exactly is that?
A moisture map is scientific, data-driven proof of the extent of the damage. Professional restoration teams use specialized sensors to map exactly which materials are wet and to what percentage.
Oh, so it's actual data.
Yes. They document the daily drying progress to prove to the insurance company that the mitigation was necessary and successful. Without that data, getting a claim approved smoothly can be a nightmare.
I like to think of it like this, ignoring a small water leak is exactly like ignoring a weird, heavy grinding noise in your car's engine.
You know it's bad.
Yeah. You might turn off the radio and hope the noise goes away, but the mechanics of the engine are still destroying themselves. Hoping water will just dry on its own in Georgia's humidity is a guaranteed way to turn a $500 mitigation cleanup into a $15,000 structural rebuild.
Because the damage curve is completely exponential. Every hour it sits, the material absorbs more water, the mold gets closer to activating, and the cost multiplies.
So if you've called the professionals and they arrive within that crucial 45-minute window we talked about earlier, what actually happens?
Right, let's walk through it.
Because we know standard box fans don't work. What is the anatomy of a proper scientific emergency response?
The professional manuals outline a very strict 5-step data-driven process.
Okay, step 1.
Step 1 is the emergency inspection and moisture mapping. And going back to what we discussed about water wicking up inside the walls, they can't just use their eyes to find it.
Right. If it's trapped behind intact drywall, a visual inspection is useless. Are they just tearing down walls indiscriminately to find the moisture?
Not at all. They use FLIR thermal imaging technology.
Thermal cameras.
Yes. FLIR cameras detect infrared radiation, which translates to heat. Because water evaporates and cools the surface of whatever material it's inside, the thermal camera shows the technicians distinct temperature differentials.
That is so cool.
It literally lets them look through the drywall and see exactly where the quote-unquote invisible water is trapped inside the wall cavities and under the floors.
That is incredible. So they map the exact perimeter of the water intrusion without swinging a single hammer.
Exactly.
Which logically leads to step 2, rapid extraction.
Correct. Using truck-mounted high-volume pumps, they physically extract the bulk liquid water from the carpets, floors, and subfloors.
To stop the wicking.
This is the crucial step to immediately halt that capillary wicking effect.
Yeah.
You have to remove the standing liquid before it can travel further up the structural materials.
Okay, so if you've extracted the liquid, the wicking stops. But the wood is still damp, and since we know mold colonizes in 48 hours, you're still on the clock.
Very much so.
How do you stop the biology before you finish the drying process?
That is step 3, structural stabilization. This is where technicians apply medical-grade, EPA-approved antimicrobials to the affected areas.
So like strong bleach?
Way beyond that. These aren't just strong cleaners. These chemical agents literally strip away the protective outer membrane of the mold spores, destroying them at a cellular level so they cannot reproduce or activate.
Wow, essentially pausing the biological clock while they dry the structure.
Precisely.
Which brings us to step 4, applied structural drying, or ASD. The manuals spend a lot of time on this. They talk about deploying LGR dehumidifiers and high CFM axial air movers.
Yeah, that's a lot of industry jargon. Let's decode it.
Please, what is CFM and why is an LGR different from the little dehumidifier sitting in my basement?
So CFM stands for cubic feet per minute. It's a measurement of how much air volume a machine can move. High CFM air movers are designed to sweep massive volumes of air across wet surfaces, causing the moisture in the wood to evaporate into the air.
Okay.
But you have to capture that moisture, which is where LGR or low-grain refrigerant technology comes in.
How is that different from a normal one?
Standard dehumidifiers, like the ones from a hardware store, simply stop pulling moisture out of the air once the room's humidity drops to a comfortable level.
But the wood is still wet deep inside.
Exactly. LGR technology is engineered with a special pre-cooling system that allows it to continue extracting moisture even in extremely low humidity environments.
Oh, I get it.
By creating an intensely dry environment in the ambient air, the LGR dehumidifier creates a severe vapor pressure deficit. Nature hates an imbalance, so the dry air literally acts like a vacuum, forcing the trapped moisture deep inside the dense wood to release outward into the air.
And then the machine catches it.
Yes, the LGR machine then captures it and pumps it away.
That distinction is vital because extraction is just vacuuming up the puddles. Drying is the scientific process of phase change.
That's a great way to phrase it.
It's forcing the liquid trapped deep inside the cellular structure of the wood to turn into vapor so it can be captured. You absolutely need both. Extraction stops the immediate spread, but the LGR drying prevents the long-term structural rot.
And that leads perfectly into the final step, monitoring. A true professional restoration team doesn't just plug in these massive machines and walk away.
They don't.
No, they return daily for 3 to 5 days using digital hygrometers and moisture meters to measure the exact moisture content of the materials.
Oh, so they are continuously updating that moisture map for the insurance company.
Precisely. The equipment stays running until the data proves that the property has hit a scientifically certified dry standard.
They literally prove your house is saved with hard data.
Exactly.
So, looking at everything we've unpacked today, the core takeaway is absolute. In Georgia, given the massive ambient humidity and the expanding red clay soils, water damage is an unforgiving race against a 48-hour mold clock.
It really is.
It's not just a puddle, It is an immediate structural and biological threat. Quick action, proper categorization of the water, and advanced technology like thermal imaging and LGR dehumidifiers are literally the only ways to save your home and your wallet.
Because hesitating for even a few hours allows that wicking effect to multiply your problems and your repair costs exponentially.
Which is exactly why you need to trust the 5-star experts at Four Seasons Air Care LLC at 404-891-0225 for any water emergency.
They possess the technology, they have the rigorous scientific training, and they have the 45-minute response time required to beat the clock.
Absolutely. So, any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up?
Yeah, actually. We've talked a lot today about how quickly water can visibly spread and wick up your walls through capillary action, but I'll leave you with this final, somewhat unsettling thought to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the physics of the stack effect. It's a building science principle where warm air naturally rises and moves upward from the ground level of a home into the upper floors.
Makes sense.
So if invisible moisture is allowed to sit unmitigated in an unconditioned crawl space or a slightly damp basement, what hidden microscopic damage, what invisible off-gassing mold spores might be slowly carried up by that stack effect into the very air you are breathing in your living room right now, just waiting for the right conditions to bloom?
Wow. That'll definitely make you look at a puddle on the floor very differently tonight. Well, thank you for walking us through all this. And to our listeners, until next time, stay curious.